Hi Equals, it's Kim. Welcome to my channel, Kim Perfect TV, and I talk about LGBT issues on this channel. And this month is June, and June is historically Pride Month. This happens to be the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Riots, and the LGBT movement kind of measures its age by the Stonewall Riots, so June 1969. And so this makes this year the 50th anniversary. So it's kind of a big year, and during Pride season, it's the 50th anniversary, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. And if you live in a big city, Columbus being one of them, this month is going to be just full of all kinds of Pride 50th anniversary activities. Here in Columbus, we continue to have this ongoing conversation in the LGBT world in Columbus, and sometimes it shows up. There she is, her head. Sometimes it shows up in, and that straight folks hear about it in the news, or they hear something and she's jostling the camera. Come here, Amber. All right, she wants obviously to be in the picture, so this is Amber. Say hi, Amber. Yes. All right. Ongoing conversation about Pride. So Stonewall Riots that we mark as ground zero or the beginning of the movement, so time starts with the Stonewall Riots in 1969, was a riot. And in June, we have Pride, partially to commemorate the Stonewall Riots, when LGBT people kind of stopped just taking it and started to fight back, and particularly against law enforcement, which, go Google Stonewall Riots and read about it. By the way, it was led by trans women of color. Ongoing conversation is, should we return to our roots, kind of a community celebration of ourselves, a place where we can bring our whole selves? Some people in my life still say, I don't understand that. Well, if I hold my wife's hand out in the general public, there is a real fear, everything's based on fear, right? Of making straight cisgender people nervous enough that they lash out somehow, because they're also responding in fear. Geez, if we could just get over all this fear, we could solve a lot of problems. But anyway, there are real consequences, and I have to think about those consequences, and so I don't hold my wife's hand very much out in public. Maybe if it's dark. But yeah, it's not a thing. I wouldn't feel comfortable giving her a kiss goodbye at the bus stop, or, these things that I see straight couples do all the time. It just doesn't feel safe. And so I feel like I have to be less of myself, perhaps. Now I got cat hair on my chin. Less of myself, perhaps, because of this kind of fear. Yeah, it's something I'm working on, and we should probably all work on it. But it's real. It's also real for people of color out in the same world, regardless of whether LGBT, is this kind of fear about, what are white folks going to do, say, etc., that might be harmful. And so they can't be themselves all the time. I have friends who speak differently around me than they would around folks back in their own community. And that's kind of sad. In a way, I appreciate the effort, because my ear is not practiced enough sometimes to pick up on the use of language. But I could get better at that if I were around it more often. It would be on me to learn. But that's sad too, that people have to be different in different spaces. And I think that's what we're talking about. So there is this ongoing conversation about, in the acceptance over the last 50 years of LGBT people and Pride, some prides have become very large corporate celebrations, and you will see all kinds of big companies out with hundreds of their employees marching in the parade. And anytime you shut down streets and do a large parade like this, it involves law enforcement. Here in Columbus, it also involves Homeland Security and the FBI, and because we're considered a target for, particularly domestic terrorism, and so after Pulse, so there's a lot of law enforcement, and I think many folks in law enforcement would say that they're there for our protection. And I think they believe that. However, when something happens, then it's often people who look different, seem different, behave different, who are targeted first. And unfortunately, trans people, and particularly trans people of color, fall into this category and tend to be more at risk anytime they're around law enforcement. So the conversation is in this corporatization and of pride and making it a really huge thing, and so that involves all this law enforcement, that maybe we've lost the spirit of the Stonewall riots. Some people question whether corporations are doing this because they really believe in inclusion, or whether they're just after the LGBT dollar. And maybe it doesn't make any difference. On Facebook this morning, I get up really early, and so I tend to be looking at Facebook, and there was this conversation between some folks that I know, and these were LGBT folks, and it was the idea of when we rely on regular police, cops, to protect particularly queer people of color, LGBT people, are we putting our more marginalized brothers and sisters at risk? Are we letting our trans sisters and brothers of color know that they're walking into a situation that's where the protection is being provided by law enforcement, who may or may not do the right thing in an emergency around trans people of color in particular? So what's the alternative? All right, I know one group who has planned a separate event from the big corporate pride that's more community. It doesn't shut down any streets, so it doesn't require, the city permitting doesn't require police there for protection. And they do, they deal with problems through community policing. Members of the group kind of provide the security, and they're trained, all that kind of stuff, but they're not cops. They're not white, cisgender, straight cops. They are members of the community who are trained in security. And that's an option. And anyway, this conversation was, rather than invite, in this case it was trans people, to a march run by an organization that doesn't have the best history around limiting the involvement of police in LGBT things, inviting trans people to this event where there were going to be cops without adequately warning folks about the danger inherent in policing. It's really weird for me to say these things. I'm practicing. I'm not very good at this. And the counter in this conversation, was that, well, we want to make sure that trans folks are there and that trans organizations are there, so that this the host organization isn't the one speaking on behalf of trans people. I get that. I'm often speaking on behalf of trans people just by the nature of doing the show, but I try always to mitigate the idea that I'm speaking for trans people as best I can. The solution being offered by one of the folks in this Facebook's conversation was that we should just be having much smaller events for I think they were, even kind of a smaller affinity group, so even a sub portion of the LGBT population. I don't know what the answer is. Those were, kind of some different thinking. We should make sure that we're in all of these kinds of events so that we're speaking for ourselves, or should we further pull back smaller situations where we can be safe from over-policing? I say all this, and it's funny because I had a conversation with a police officer recently. My car was doing weird things and it wouldn't start. And I was like halfway in, halfway out of a parking spot, stuck there. And I couldn't figure out how to fix my car. And a police officer pulled up behind me. He was probably wondering why I was hanging out half in and half out of my parking space, kind of blocking the aisle. I became very conscious of the fact that I was quite comfortable getting out of my car, walking over to the police officer, explaining what was going on. He was very helpful. He went, he suggested I call the dealership, which I did. He actually came back and he said he'd Googled it or something. And, he was really, really helpful. Eventually my car just started after I just let it be for a while. It wasn't flooded. It was some other weird thing. I remember through this all thinking, if I weren't a white, older person, would I have gotten that much help from him? In a way, I hate that I don't trust law enforcement the same way that I used to, but I have to take the experiences of, my brothers and sisters, my queer LGBT people of color's experiences and honor them. Have we found the right fix to this? Not yet. I don't think so. Is there a fix? I think so. But it's going to take a lot of work. And all of us, police officers, elected officials, LGBT people, people of color, are going to have to probably do some real hard thinking about fear, how we respond to fear, and how do we overcome fear to find room to love, honor, respect, give dignity to, and allow everyone to feel pride. Whoever you are, LGBT, cisgender, white, straight person, have a great June. You're entitled to be proud of yourself if you are a good person and open to diversity, and that you're not hurting someone else, or making fun of someone else, or mocking someone else. I guess all of that's the same. If we're trying our best to love one another, and then tomorrow I try my best again, and I do a little better, then we can all feel proud of ourselves. For those of you who are in a marginalized community and have your own spaces where you feel comfortable, great. Happy Pride. And for cisgender, white, straight folks, enjoy every day when you don't have to think about these things. But remember, some of us don't have that same privilege. Happy Pride Month, everybody. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, hit the red subscribe button, and you can hit the bell and turn it red so that you're notified every time I put up a new video. Bye, equals.